Welcome to the second part of this lecture. And in the previous part of this lecture, we just outlined the normal trajectory of growth. But there are many factors that can cause abnormal prenatal development. These can arise from genetic factors, as individuals may inherit genetic abnormalities from dominant or recessive genes. If the abnormality is from a dominant gene, only one parent needs to pass the gene in order for the child to have the abnormal development. In the case of the abnormality being caused by a recessive gene, both parents must pass the gene that causes the abnormality. Genetic abnormalities can also result from a new mutation that occurs during the formation of the embryo. There may be an alteration or deleting of a gene from the egg or the sperm, or the egg or sperm may have had a genetic abnormality to begin with. These mutations can take place as a result of irradiation and certain chemical hazardous environments, age, or just spontaneous mutations. New and inherited disorders can result in single or multiple malformations, disruptions in development, and some of these are obvious at birth and others may appear later on. This chart outlines the periods in development that each of the main parts of the body systems are most susceptible to abnormal development. And we can see that most of the body parts and systems are susceptible during the embryonic period. And this is the time period when the infant is most susceptible to teratogens. This time is known as the critical period because most of the organ systems begin to form around this time. As we saw in the chart, each organ itself has a specific critical form. During this critical period, the infant is most susceptible to teratogens, which are any drug or chemical agent that causes abnormal development in the fetus upon exposure. Examples of teratogens include alcohol, tobacco, environmental toxins, and can also include viruses. So during this embryonic phase of 2 to 8 weeks, we know that the infant is far more susceptible to a lot of external factors that can negatively influence the development of their organ systems. So, kind of take a minute to think for yourself, what are some substances in general that pregnant women are told to avoid? And what environments or situations are pregnant women encouraged to avoid? And what other substances or supplements are women encouraged to take during pregnancy? So, some of the things that they are told to avoid include alcohol, drugs, cocaine is what's coming to my mind, but they're also told to avoid environments that have chemical hazards in them. So many times when we go to public places, we'll see signs that say, contains hazardous material, pregnant women should be aware. Sometimes even coffee shops have things like that. In terms of substances or supplements, many women are encouraged to take prenatal vitamins so that their fetus has the appropriate nutrition during the development. This chart over here outlines the effects of some of the viral diseases and their effect on prenatal development. And we can see that for most diseases, exposure has negative consequences on the fetus. One major contribution of viral and environmental teratogens is low birth weight and premature birth. We can see in this chart that there are negative consequences to low birth weight. Children who are born with a low birth weight tend to have higher rates of being placed in special education, repeated grades, and school failure compared to their normal birth weight peers. We can see that these effects are amplified in children with very low birth weight. Now that we've discussed prenatal development, let's discuss some of the growth patterns that take place after birth. The general pattern of growth follows a sigmoid shape rather than a linear pattern. This S-shaped pattern occurs as a result of various spurts and steady periods of growth, and the timing of these spurts and steady periods varies by sex. When assessing the extent and rate of growth, we have to take into account what each type of graph tells us. Distance curves show us the extent of growth, and velocity curves show us the rate of growth. The peaks in the velocity curve show us the ages at which the rate of growth changes from faster to slower. We can see here on the left, this is a distance curve, and the one on the right is a velocity curve. Height follows the same sigmoid pattern and peak velocity of the change in height that occurs. The peak velocity of the change in height occurs around 11.5 to 12 years, and growth tapers off around 14 and ends at 16 for girls. For boys, the peak velocity of change in height occurs a little bit later, at 13 to 14 years, and growth tapers at 17 and ends around 18. The long growth period of males contributes to the higher absolute height difference in males compared to females. This graph outlines the growth chart of the height of boys on the left and girls on the right, and you can see how the extended period of growth contributes to the greater absolute height of boys over girls. Once again, like I said, we can see here that the boys are on the left, and since they had a much longer period of growth, their absolute height is higher than that of the girls. Weight follows a similar pattern to height and is susceptible to factors such as diet and exercise. Individuals often grow tall first, then fill out, so the peak weight velocity follows the peak height velocity by 2 to 3 months for boys and 3.5 to 10.5 months for girls. We can see that these curves look similar to the height graphs, with the peak velocities taking place a little bit later than the peak velocities for height. Boys here are on the left and girls are on the right. And we can see again that since boys have a greater time period over which this gain in weight takes place, they tend to have a higher overall weight. As the whole body follows a sigmoid pattern, specific parts of the body, the tissues and organs, have different growth rates contributing to the physical changes that take place. As we mature, our body portions change as we go from being head-heavy with short limbs at birth to developing adult-like proportions later on. This being said, not all adults have similar proportions, as different parts of their body have been growing at different rates, creating their individual body types. Throughout adulthood and aging, height is relatively stable, but may decrease in older adulthood as we experience the compression of cartilage pads, as well as bone disorders such as osteoporosis. This is something that we'll be discussing in the following lecture in more detail. Just to go over the lecture outline once again, today we discussed prenatal growth, abnormal prenatal development, postnatal development, and the assessment of growth. We'll see you guys in the next lecture, and please feel free to shoot me any emails if you have questions about your assignment where you will be making growth charts based on the data provided in the textbook. Have a good rest of your day.